talk to a lot of people in climate about what got them to kind of cross culture and start to act on climate. And it's usually something really personal. And so again, men have to get comfortable with the moment, right? That something happened, that they saw the farm animal and then they looked their dog in the eye or whatever.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse. The holidays are fast approaching, so make sure to pick up plenty of copies of everyone's favorite anti-romance romance, Marrying Myself, by me, Christine Melanie Benson. It's got a vegan protagonist, a surprise ending, and it's guaranteed to plant some surreptitious seeds about veganism in the minds and hearts of all your omnivore friends. You can find it on Amazon and everywhere else, or visit my website, christinemelaniebenson.com. And now for this week's episode. We all have our own unique path to veganism, and Andrea Learned, like so many people, came to it in a roundabout way, in her case through environmentalism. And she, like so many of us, came to discover that it's all connected. The health of our planet and ecosystems, the health of our bodies, and how we treat the non-human animals on our planet. Andrea is a self-proclaimed climate influence producer and host of the Living Change Climate Leadership podcast. She's now in the development stage of her second podcast, Climate Influence with Andrea Learned, and is working on a documentary. Andrea is well known for her deep climate network and counterintuitive social engagement and leadership development approach. Andrea's early career was in marketing to women, during which time she co-authored the book, Don't Think Pink, What Really Makes Women Buy, and How to Increase Your Share of This Crucial Market. These many pieces came together when she wrote her master's thesis in 2011 on gender and sustainability leadership. So enjoy this conversation with Andrea Learned. Andrea, welcome to the Vegan Posse. Are you ready for the ride of your life?
I am ready for the ride of my life. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. And we're recording this episode on Election Day. So the world is in for a ride.
The world is in for a ride. And I'm hoping that vibes of joy and love and kind of collective yay are going to be spread through the world today.
Hey, we can put it out there. We can put it out there. Yes. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
So, well, on the Vegan Posse, we welcome all kinds of vegans, but of course our focus is the animals and the unconscionable exploitation and suffering perpetuated on them in our so-called food system. So, Andrea, I'm curious, I'd love to hear a little more about you and where you're from and where you grew up, and if you ever thought about the animals in our food system.
That is a really good question. And your podcast is full of kind of interesting backstories on that. And looking at it from this perspective, it's always like, wow, I just wasn't thinking about it at all. Right back where I was raised. So for
good reason. Again, we're taught not to.
Yes,
so people feel the need to make that disclaimer. You know, I can almost hear people apologizing for it, but in reality, as you well know, there's been a concerted effort to keep kids from thinking about those things. So
there has,
So all that said, please continue. Yes.
So all that said, I was raised in a small Midwestern town on Lake Michigan. So I was raised just kind of outside of Chicago, would have been my bigger city, by really traditional parents and kind of a traditional family. And interestingly, kind of a mom who really couldn't cook that well. So it was the, it was the basics of the mushroom casserole and the kind of roast every Sunday and all of that. We did the usual stuff, riding our bikes around. We were very interestingly involved in nature. We lived on a beach. So I grew up really happy and kind of oblivious. And then I ended up going to University of Michigan for school, and I ultimately ended up getting into communications as work, and then that sort of led me into climate. And all of the long story that we can get into more deeply is that climate then ended up helping me get into veganism, which is sort of a reverse, not the usual way. But that's a deep part of my story and part of really what I'm talking about a lot in my work and on my podcasts.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so interesting. I mean, we all have such different paths, and I don't know that there is one normal way. But when did you start getting interested in climate and the environment, and what was going on for you there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a book about marketing to women and was in communication strategy stuff. And then at a certain point, it was literally my mom kind of just knowing my personality, who was like, I don't understand why you're not in sustainability or something, and I just was like, what? And this was like, I was in my 40s. And she's,
Interesting. Well, can we, if we could just backtrack for a minute, like what was your interest in communications? What did you see yourself doing in that field?
well, it was really writing. And I think now that it was storytelling. And I just came very naturally to it. And it was interesting because my mother was in kind of English professor, et cetera. I came really naturally to me to be able to write, and also what I'm discovering now from my work is be really enthusiastic, right? And tell happy stories and warm stories and like positive and forward moving stories. And so that was the thing. And then it was really, I didn't discover it or get into it more professionally until I started working and started a business in marketing to women. And then it was like, how do you let the world know that you're out there? Oh, this is way back when, you should be writing articles on this in some business publication that a lot of people see. And so it was like, write an article about marketing to women and see what happens. And boom, people started following me. I got a regular place to post these things, et cetera, et cetera. So the writing was in the background.
Yeah, well, let's backtrack again because
Okay.
I'm also curious. I see that you did your master's thesis in 2011
Yeah.
on gender and sustainability leadership. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
tell me
Yeah.
about that combination.
Well, so it's funny because I got into marketing to women as a fluke, co-authored a book on marketing to women in 2004, then kind of was doing this work, then realized that sustainability was really interesting to me, then got the master's degree in 2011. And I was coming from a deep understanding of how women make decisions on what to buy. But then I was like, I don't really want to help women or people sell more stuff to women. I was really interested in their decision making as leaders, which then led me to leadership, sustainability, kind of integrated leadership. And then I was like, oh, women's ways, the things that I know about women and the way they make decisions are really powerful for thinking about sustainability and leading in that way. And so that led to the thesis on it and me only talking to men in high level sustainability positions about what were the traits and the skills that they had that made a big difference. And 201, they said, oh, the MBA, whatever. They said it was really psychology, communication skills, kind of understanding those quote unquote softer things that really helped them become a powerful sustainability leader. And that's where my thesis came.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, this whole concept of leadership too, when you throw that in the mix. I mean, I've shared this story before, but I remember it being noted at one of the animal rights conferences that I had been to about how something like, you know, the large majority of vegans are women, and yet the leaders in the animal rights and vegan movements, very few of them are women. and this is a story I've shared before, but it still rankles at me. It was at an event when I was living in New York City. I went to an author event, and it was Mark Bittman, the New York Times food guy, and I believe David Katz. I'm pretty sure it was those two people, Dr. David Katz, who's done some great work. Both of them are vegan forward, vegan leaning, kind of vaguely pro-vegan, but neither one is vegan. And they were on the stage in a room full of women. There were, the event was like at least probably 95% women, most of whom, at least the ones I talked to, were ethical vegans, there because they believed in this. And we were all sitting there looking at these two men on the stage talk to us and pontificate, and they weren't even vegan. I just remember thinking, what is wrong with this picture?
Well,
so yeah.
And that, I mean, actually, that was sort of driving, and the research that I did looking into that for my thesis was really interesting. It's that, right, our culture is just like white men of a certain age are leaders. And that's just this like thing that we've got in our heads. And so that continues. I have an interesting story related to that, which is when I was in the middle of the Marketing to Women book and kind of speaking on that, I got to know people around Tom Peters. And one of the times he was speaking at something I was at, Tom Peters, the big business kind of author.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him.
He's kind of a famous, known kind of business leadership author from back in the day. And he is up there talking, to your point, like, women are the ones we should be watching. Women are the ones who, going on and on about this. Then a woman who was like a high level executive at the Bank of California or something came up to him after and said, "Hey, Tom, could you tell my boss that what you just said in that presentation?" And Tom is like, "Why do I need to? You're like a highly qualified, you're this amazing person that works with him, whatever." And she's like, "He would only take it from a man." And so we exist in this world, and it's on election day that we're recording this. We continue to exist in this world, but my work and kind of the way I'm approaching things now, I'm finding a lot more men who are really open to and awakening to their feminine ways and are stepping back a little bit. And so I think we're on a trajectory where we may see some change. Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, in your personal journey, tell us a little about what sparked your interest in and concern about environmental issues.
Yeah, I think it was mainly that writing the book about marketing to women, I was really helping sell more stuff to women. And then it became...
And what was the gist of this book? What's the takeaway from marketing to women? I'm so curious.
The book is that the name of the book is Don't Think Pink. So the idea is that you are selling to the most influential consumer out there. We should be directing all of our marketing at understanding women and kind of reaching them effectively, because that trickles down and reaches everybody more effectively. Instead, we're focused on marketing to men. And then what we do when we want to market to women is we just package the same thing that we would package for men in pink, kind of generally. And so I'll get, like a snowboard, when people started making snowboards for women, they basically were shrunk down and they were pink. And this sort of continues. And so, but the idea is that the quote that we've used forever, and no one knows the original, is that women make or influence 80% or more of consumer purchases. And so we are doing it backwards. And I would say that we're doing leadership backwards, right? Lead with the feminine and you catch everybody. Lead with the masculine and you got to contort to figure out how to catch women's attention.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a little bit paradoxical, and also a little bit of just sort of an inherent issue when it comes to leadership, is that part of what makes us women, more open to going vegan and just more concerned about things like the environment and those sorts of things and I'll preface this by saying, of course, these are overgeneralizations, and men and women are different on an individual level, but generally speaking, women are more cooperative, more collaborative, and more compassionate and relational. And so the very qualities that make them so important and makes us so important and wonderful and valuable are also the very qualities that are going to prevent them from being cutthroat and competitive and, just typically rising to the highest leadership ranks in the executive worlds. So what do you make of this?
Well,
Just balance.
yeah, one of the things I make of it is because I have been talking to a lot of men and I tend to interview men because what I'm trying to do is get to that this all exists in them. They just have not been given permission, or our culture jumps all over them if they kind of express that they've got kind of a softer take on things, or they want, involve community more or stuff. So it's interesting because our cultures build this up. This is the way it is. And then I think all of us know plenty of men who have like feminine skill, feminine ways, or think more about this big picture stuff. And so it's a cultural thing. And part of it is, I think that we can just pull out, and I talk about it a lot in my work, conversion stories. Like, talk to more men who are vegan about why they went vegan, how hard it was to go vegan, and kind of what they've experienced in the culture and that shift. And that's where we sort of get a lot more knowledge. I talk to a lot of people in climate about what got them to kind of cross culture and start to act on climate. And it's usually something really personal. And so
Mm,
again, men have to get comfortable with the moment, right? That something
mm.
happened, that they saw the farm animal and then they looked their dog in the eye or whatever.
Right. So what was your moment? Do you have a moment?
Well, it's interesting. I don't have a moment as much as I found myself veering away from meat, away from eating meat, because I didn't like to touch it. I didn't like to put it on the counter, and I didn't know why. I'm from a background where my mom was not that great of a cook, and so even whenever she made things like that, I just was. So I ultimately ended up being vegetarian very kind of easily. And then
How old were you at that time when you went vegetarian?
oh, I was old. I was like 40.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
but I mean, I think I had really not been eating much meat and really not eating red meat for years. I just didn't put two and two together.
yeah,
And
interesting.
yeah, and so then I probably was eating less and less meat, but I didn't have any awareness of the dairy, any at all, right? Or like
Yep.
eating eggs, but I ate eggs and I liked the idea of eating eggs, but every time I ate them, I felt horrible when it come to think of it.
Oh, like horrible
Like
emotionally?
in
Like
my
morally?
morally and in my stomach.
Oh,
I think it's
interesting.
all
Yeah,
related. And so
sure, sure.
then then it wasn't until I moved to Seattle and I was in my 40s, 50s, and I was on a marketing committee for a radio station that's based here that's called KEXP, that a lot of people, it's globally known. And I was going into these marketing meetings, and one of the DJs, the morning DJ, John Richards, is vegan and had been for some time, and he doesn't harp on it on the air. He drops it, right? But he would come into meetings with his nuts and seeds. I always say that, right? He'd come into meetings with his green smoothie and his nuts and seeds. And his music and kind of his vibe, he's very giving and loving and just a real community builder on the air. Something about him was very influential to me. That's why I always
Mm,
talk about influence in my climate work. He was
mm.
influential to me. He had no idea that he was, but I was like, oh, John is this person I really admire. He keeps coming at, why am I, and then once I kind of looked into it, then I got into understanding the animal connection and really looking at that and going, how on earth have I had dogs for so long and not understood this and whatever. So I have a really kind of backwards way into it.
Yeah, it's so interesting how sometimes our biggest influences, like you said, don't necessarily know that they're influences. But prior to this time when you were at the radio station, you were thinking about the environment, you were thinking about sustainability.
Mhm.
Did agriculture and animal ag in particular ever enter into that equation?
Well, it's interesting. No.
Mhm.
And so it
Right.
was me getting personally converted and then kind of diving in a little bit, but then very quickly, I think it was within like 6 months of really understanding this, that I was like, wait, how can I apply my climate communications and strategic thinking to this space? And I immediately went out and looked on jobs that said vegan and climate or something, right? Or looked for opportunities. And then I found one. And so I was able to get in and do kind of a deep dive on plant-based forward food systems globally, and got to know the space better. And really, that just, of course, ramped up my education.
So interesting. So what did you find out and what surprised you?
Well, the thing that's so interesting is it's all of the stuff. It's the animals. It's the way that we culturally have a complete disconnect as to how, the process works. It's the whole industrialized agriculture, really understanding those feedlots, the processing, all of that. It was really from the industrialized agriculture standpoint that I was like, oh my gosh. Then it goes to all the land that's needed, all the trees that are needed to be cut down, the land use side. There were so many aspects of it that just all went together. And so, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, that all makes so much sense, and it's funny just hearing you describe all of these systems. It all makes so much sense in hindsight. Like it seems so obvious in so many ways that of course it's so much less efficient to raise plants, feed them to animals, and then eat the animals and their byproducts, as opposed to raising plants and just eating the plants. It seems so obvious, and yet it's something that never even crossed my mind.
Well, and it's so funny because once I got into the climate space, a colleague that I was working with, and I'm sure it's been said a million times, but she said, we are growing food to feed food. And so as soon as as soon as you do that, you're like, wow, there's this whole thing in there. And so to your point, exactly that was this like, we can just eat what comes out of the ground and not have it do this pass through.
Right, right. And the same argument applies for the people who like to say that, oh, well, maybe plants feel pain, or I think they do feel pain. Well, okay, even if they do, we're still hurting fewer of them if we eat them directly than raise them and feed them to
Yes.
sentient beings. Yeah.
No, yeah.
But and what I appreciate too about the common sense, just nuts and bolts line of reasoning is that it doesn't require a complex climate science, for people to understand.
No, and I think the point is that it's come in through deforestation, and then now it's really coming in strong through industrialized agriculture, right? And I work a lot with the climate media, and the way that you can get into this is by looking at and then going to all the neighborhoods that live around, say a big meat processing plant or whatever, and kind of all that happens. So oddly and interestingly, some of us come to it through animals. Some of us come to it through maybe worker justice, which happened during COVID. Meat processing plants were horrible to the workers that were there, kind of all these different ways. And then because I think we keep averting our eyes from the very basics, which is the killing of the animals, which, I'm one of those people who can hardly watch the films about this because right. And I think that that's part of this challenge is like getting the message across because so many people are averting their eyes. But I did watch Meet Me Halfway, Brian Capeman's film. And he does.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh,
I haven't even heard of that one.
Okay. Meet Me Halfway. He's the head of the Reducitarian Foundation.
Oh, okay.
So he's got a really good take on this. And so that film is really, he talks with his parents about kind of it. And he just goes into one scene where he's standing there at that pork processing plant in LA. I think it's gone now. But as the pigs come in, that whole thing, and just the little teeny weeny bit of that you see, he's just crying, right? And I can't even take watching that. And so I think our culture, and obviously big meat, big agriculture has been making sure, right, that we just see the cute cow on the sign, the cartoon cow, etc. So it is a cultural thing, and it is a messaging thing, and it is a storytelling thing, which I think was another reason that once I got into it, I was like, oh, right, I think I can figure out a way to tell stories in my leadership space that can change things a little bit here.
Yeah, which is a challenge. I mean, that's a task. That's a task. Mm. But I'm curious. So when you made this decision to go vegan, John Richards, was that your DJ friend?
Yes, John Richards is my DJ friend. Yes.
That's such a sweet story. And does he know that you're a vegan now?
Oh, yes, because the through line of this is that, and I'm sure we would eventually talk about it, is that I have a podcast. I have a I think it's about 11 episode podcast called Living Change, A Quest for Climate Leadership. And the first person that I interviewed, and this was during COVID, was John. And
Oh,
he
perfect.
started, and I want to say this because I want anyone who visits Seattle to make sure that they go to he's got a vegan bar. He doesn't call it a vegan bar. It's a bar called Life on Mars, which is a David Bowie album. And it's all plant-based down to the leather of the booths, the tubing that's used, any of the beer or wine brands. Like, he and his wife have been vegan, and they were very specific about every last detail of this bar. And the thing is
Beautiful.
when you go into it, it is just a really fun place because there are all these records on the wall, and you've got it's really fun. You do not walk in and go, oh, this is a vegan bar. And so that was my whole point. And so the first episode of my podcast with John Richards is incredible. So he does know. And I use that example a lot because I'm just like, you bring this, a lot of times you can bring this in through the back door. Go to a really fun place. It happens to be vegan. You loved all the food. Who knew? And so
Who knew?
his story is the one that I point to a lot. And the other aspect of that is he is influencing climate he's globally known, and he's got a wide following. I mean, he's a celebrity in a way, right? He's got a wide following from all over the world. People come to Seattle because of our music thing. They always go to KXP, and then they're always going to go to John's Bar. So it could be the first plant-based meal that a lot of people have ever had. And that is climate influence because you start that process. And so this is why I'm so excited, because I like to talk to and I like to elevate stories that are not the people on stage, but these other people that are leading a kind of a push in climate, often through plant-based food. And I say plant-based food because in my world, that's the easier way to talk about it, right? I get people in that way, and then they realize, so the plant-based food systems transition, and that has become more of what I do. I've been advising New York City's plant-powered carbon challenge, which is trying to get a shift in food policy for corporate headquarters, et cetera. So getting kind of this plant-based for climate has then now become kind of my thing. But this interview with John is amazing because he pulls in, he knows a lot of famous musicians, and he's like, I'll be, somebody from the music industry is like, I'd really like to go vegan, but I like pizza. And John's like, in my interview, he's like, well, go vegan and then occasionally eat your cheese pizza. And what you and I know is that if you go mostly vegan and then you have some cheese, your body's going to say, no more. And so, it's self-perpetuating. So he's got a really good approach about it.
Very interesting. And I think that's what I love about our movement and our cause is that there are so many people to learn from, and we're all so different, and we all have our own ways, and some are more effective. Some ways are more effective than other ways,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't just all be cookie cutter vegan activists. We have to bring our own style and our own approach. And it's just wonderful to see what people are doing that's working. So Andrea, when you went vegan, how difficult was it for you to make that change?
Oh, thank you for asking that question, because it was not difficult at all. And so I will say I run into a lot of like my neighbors, the women in my neighborhood and whatever, and they're just like, oh, I think I could do that, but I couldn't give up cheese. And that's the way I kind of felt, because I had sort of stopped eating eggs and I really wasn't eating meat. But so dairy was the hardest thing for me. But I just made the decision and I was like, okay, I guess I'll be eating a lot of hummus, and crackers or whatever. It really wasn't that hard. And I think I got over it within like a month. And so I think that is like a lie, that's sort of in the culture. If you talk to anybody who's gone, who's become a vegan, the cheese thing was not that hard to give up.
Yeah. For me personally, I had stopped eating cheese just for health reasons a long time prior. So for me, cheese wasn't the thing.
Yeah.
But I will say it was hard for me at first going vegan. I was a very non-vegan vegetarian for a long time. And for me, it was the healthy dairy, the non-fat Greek yogurt and, the egg whites and the egg beaters.
Yes.
So I did find it hard for a few weeks. I did. But then things just kind of exploded in a positive way, and it just became this glorious adventure.
Well, and I think to your point, it took a few weeks. I think people think it's taking months and they're never going to get over it, right? But both of us just said it took a couple of weeks. Anyone can do it. And the health benefits let alone all the other benefits. The health benefits, I think, are immediate. They felt immediate in me.
Really? So what kinds of health benefits did you
Well,
feel?
I just felt really quickly, I felt a little lighter on the inside, so that when I was working out, I just felt like I could run. Like I just felt lighter,
Huh.
like I was lifting up a lighter body. And also my skin, I thought, was fine. My skin got better. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I think my fingernails got better. Like, so, and my hair, like all these things that I didn't know weren't good,
right.
or weren't, as soon as this dairy change, especially, everything, my skin got better, my hair got better, my nails got better. It was amazing. And which so many people are really hooked on, is I immediately lost probably the last 3 to 4 pounds that kind of were sitting in me, that I was just kind of letting go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you didn't have any particular health concerns before you went into it. You were
Not at
feeling pretty
all. I
good,
mean,
but
I think that
yeah.
that's the thing too. Like, I was super healthy and I only got healthier. I don't,
Right,
that isn't said
right.
enough, I don't think. Yeah.
Right, right. I think that's a great point. Yeah. And how was it from a social perspective?
Mm.
How did this change affect your personal relationships?
Well, I'm a really direct person, and so,
I can
can
tell
you
that.
tell?
Yes.
And so and also I think the reason that people can take it from me a little bit is I'm so enthusiastic. I'm like, oh my gosh, I went vegan. It's incredible. Like I'm trying to share that with people. But then the other thing is, when I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to like meet my friends at restaurants, because it
Hard
still,
for you or for everybody?
well, hard to meet them at a particular restaurant because there would be no vegan options. They wouldn't like that, right? They wouldn't. And so I would say, I started to be the one who's like, where are we going to meet? Okay, let me just double check. And then pretty quickly, my friends were like, oh, I think this is one that has some good vegan options. So they started to think about me. But the thing about kind of meeting them, and then also going to people's houses for Thanksgiving or whatever, you realize that you have to be in control and bring your own food and kind of all of that. But it does, and you have to be ready for the conversations that it starts. And it always
Yeah.
starts really, really good conversations, because a lot of people are sort of thinking about it. And then it's like, oh, here's someone who's vegan. I can ask them the questions right here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, for me, it's always interesting to see who is thinking about it and who does ask questions. It's often not the people I expect and the people
Mm.
I'm kind of, being effusively enthusiastic to sometimes just aren't interested. And then some other person I never even would have anticipated would have any curiosity is like, oh, I'm trying to eat more plant based. What?
Well, and I mean, not surprisingly, I find that if I go to a Thanksgiving or I go to some big meal and there are younger people there, right? A lot of them are or are veering. And I think also what
Mhm.
happens is that we have conversations kind of socially within the group, other people's ears are listening. Right. So it's an indirect
Yes.
way to educate. And for them, I think the pressure with veganism is a direct, like, you know, are you vegan? Why not? Blah, blah, blah. But if they start to go, oh, that person's vegan, I like that person. Right. Oh, and those kids over there, those kids that I really like are vegan or veering plant based. That's interesting. There's a thing about advertising messages. I think you take in a message like 7 different ways, it will land.
Mhm.
And so I keep thinking of
Mhm.
all the ways that plant-based or veganism is wonderful, as however that lands for someone 7 different times is really going to have an effect on them. So all these social kind of little lightweight conversations matter.
Yes, yes. And were you single at the time that you went vegan?
Yes, yes. So I didn't have to deal with
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And how was it navigating the holidays? I mean, as we record this, we're on the cusp of Thanksgiving. Halloween is just behind us. The Christmas holidays are coming up. So how has that been for you?
Well, it's pretty known. There are a couple things I make known with my friends. They know that I have like a 2-hour limit. So on top of everything else, I need to leave things at like 2 hours. So
Just generally speaking, is this
yeah,
vegan related or just temperamentally?
it's temperament. It's kind of, it's the, are you an introvert or an extrovert thing? I'm very extroverted when I'm on, but I need to go
Yeah.
home and, be alone a lot. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I
I've,
relate. I
do you?
relate.
Yeah. So
Oh yeah.
I've kind of gotten my friends used to that. And so now I'm just like, oh, I'm vegan, so I'll bring whatever, and don't, if you make a side dish that doesn't have butter in it, I can eat, like I just make it easy for them, and I don't, and then they know, it's interesting because again, it has started a lot of conversations, even with neighbors that I've gone over to neighbors' houses, and now a lot more people are veering more plant-based because of just like knowing me and having me come in and, say, oh, I'm going to eat this, or I'm not going to eat that, or whatever.
And have you managed to have any, influence? You're a big influencer. Yeah.
Yes,
Have
yes.
any of the people gone vegan, or some of your friends been
I,
open to this message?
a lot of people are very open to this message because, and I'm sure that you get this too, I am a fit, healthy 60-year-old woman. No one can ever believe that. I ride my bike, I whatever, and I'm very enthusiastic. So people that I know think that they want some of what I've got, right? Like, how are you? And I'm just saying that, right? This is sort of the way, and this is why my podcast works and whatever. Like, I exude and exist this lifestyle. And so I make it seem possible. And also, who doesn't want to think that they might be able to look 10 years younger, say, or something, right? So I have influenced neighbors. A lot of people listen to the John Richards episode of my podcast, and we're like, and even if you
Yeah,
look,
we'll certainly link to that in the
yes,
show
yes, yes.
notes.
And if you
Yeah.
look at the comments to my Living Change podcast, the reviews, and then kind of, yeah, the little reviews on Apple, so one listener was like, I'm a meat eater, and, that episode really got me, or something, right? So you'd be surprised, and I think that I have influenced a lot of people too. Well, another interview that I did was with Alex Fish, who's a former city council and mayor of Culver City, California, who's now in the attorney general's office, and it was really about him biking. So the other thing that I talk about a lot is biking for transportation. And we had
Mm.
this whole conversation and a very enthusiastic, fun interview. And he's just, by the end of it, we ended the podcast recording, and he's like, I'm going to go meatless Monday. I'm going to bring my family meatless Monday. So I influence people kind of offhand, not even directly, because
Yep.
I live it and exude it, I think.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's no substitute for that. There's just no substitute, because if people see unhappy, uptight, sad vegans just crying in the corner all day over animal rights videos, it's not going to work.
It's not going to
Yeah.
work. I think we've discovered that. And the other thing that's happened in my work, I mentioned earlier that I'm doing this work with New York City's Office of Food Policy for plant-powered
Yeah.
carbon.
That's super exciting. I mean,
So
that's huge. How did that come about?
well, it's the vegan community in climate space. And I will say, the way that I met the person who works in the mayor's office in New York City, who then made sure that I got kind of on this project, was through social media. There used to be and maybe there still is, there's an app that was an audio thing called Clubhouse. It was a social media thing, and you could go on and
Okay.
you would listen. And so it was talking and listening, and it actually was really cool. And I'm kind of bummed it just,
Interesting.
but
Hmm.
I was kind of early on that, and I was very involved in the nonprofit that I was working with on the food systems transition, and so I got to meet more of those people, and so I was sort of connected to more people that are talking about climate and food and policy. And I met this woman that way, and she is in the mayor's office in New York City, and we just connected, and she realized that I had this interesting level of influence in the climate space, that if I kind of got in and helped be a voice in the vegan space, it would really help with the industrial agriculture and stuff. So she has connected me over the years and been really wonderful. And so ultimately, they were doing this project in New York City, and I got on it. And to your point, how do you influence people? You do these shifts in corporate catering or corporate food service, because it can be done. There's an organization,
Mm.
you've probably interviewed somebody from Greener by Default.
No,
You
no.
should. I will connect you with them.
Okay. Okay.
So there's an
Perfect. Yeah.
organization that's whole existence is just to help universities, institutions, corporations start to veer in a plant-based direction. And
Right.
they actually implement this program that I'm working with New York City on. And that's where the change happens. You just put more plant-based options at eye level, if you will, and people make that selection. And then they're like, oh, I had the greatest plant-based burrito today at work. I'll try one out. So it's the food policy shift that actually is hugely influential. And that's probably going to continue to be a big part of what I do at the policy level.
That's fantastic. And yes, I love hearing about those systemic changes that just
Mhm.
make plant-based or vegan, the default. And oh, you can choose something else if you prefer, but like this is this is the go-to.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me this because you know Al Gore had the movie An Inconvenient Truth about climate change, but then as many vegans like to point out, there's an even more inconvenient truth to a lot of so-called environmentalists that animal ag is just not at all easy on the planet. So how has it been for you navigating the environmental sector, carrying this vegan message?
I've been what I've been trying to do is to influence and point that out. Like if climate leaders and climate advocates themselves aren't vegan or being more visibly vegan, so I often say be seen leading. And in all my work and the people I interview and sort of as I'm doing this plant-based kind of, I keep saying plant-based, but forwarding plant-based kind of a veering plant-based, I say be seen leading. If you ate a really good plant based meal at a restaurant, stand outside, take a selfie, say, I just ate at this great restaurant. Don't make it a hardcore whatever, but we need to see more leaders in climate living that change. That's why the podcast was Living Change, living the
Mhm.
change, because we're doing a lot of talking and not really in action, doing it in action. We're not walking the talk. And so that's the power of the work that I do, which is I'm looking for conversion stories. I know for a fact that there is a CEO of a big kind of car company right now who is vegan. And if that person would come out and talk about it more, I think it's teeny bit public, but I've approached them and haven't, it's too scary to do this publicly at that level. But if a white male CEO of a corporation even said, I'm veering plant based publicly and talked about how great the food was, it would have a huge influence in our world. And so I'm looking for those people who may be veering plant based or vegan already, and maybe just like thinking politically they're not up for the whatever might happen, and finding a couple of them to kind of help and support to make public more what they're up to. And I know exactly how to strategically do that. The other thing I will say related to your question is climate media. And we are seeing a much bigger kind of trend in media who are covering climate, starting to cover agriculture, animal agriculture, and then getting into the food stuff. You've probably already interviewed somebody from Sentient Media.
No.
So there's a
No.
whole, I've got links for you. So
Please,
there's a
yeah.
whole kind of platform called Sentient Media, and their whole thing is to try and get this conversation in industrialized agriculture and into this mainstream thing. And they're doing
Mm.
amazing work. And so they're educating journalists on how to talk about this, how to write about this, how to get into more mainstream publications, et
Mm.
cetera. So I think I'm very positive and hopeful. I'm seeing a big uptick in it. And really, I also think that a lot more climate journalists, if they are plant based, should let that out a little bit, talk about that a little bit too. So I think there's a lot of neglected opportunity for moving influence in this space. And I find that is my role. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find them and I'm going to make them comfortable enough to want to talk about it. And I'm going to interview them.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, like you bring up, I think just the whole process of normalizing this way of living is so essential. And you may know I have a novel called Marrying Myself, which is women's fiction and features a vegan protagonist. That's not the focus of the book, but it's a significant part of the book. And so kind of like, the Mars bar. What's it called? Life on Mars. John Richards's
Life on
bar.
Mars, John Richards
Life
bar.
on
Yep.
Mars.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. It's people don't come into it or, pick up my book
Mm-hmm.
because they're interested in reading a vegan story, but they see veganism, they hear about veganism while they're reading an entertaining story. So
Well,
I think that's so huge in just carrying this message in all areas.
I think it's huge. And I also think that for example, a role for you could be to help elevate anybody who's a vegan author to make sure that they're mentioning it, and kind of communicating it well. I think there's a huge aspect
Agreed.
of that. And in fact, if
Yeah.
there is a vegan author who who's kind of also a climate person, let me know, right? Because that's also something. I think that we each in our spaces, I've got like corporate leadership kind of NGO level stuff, though that's my community and those are the people I'm trying to influence. I think the same thing in the author sector. You could be cheering people on for mentioning veganism and kind of dropping it into stories like that. It is hugely powerful. And that is one of the things I'm really pushing on.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We're on the same page, just in different sectors. Well, tell me what's New York City like these days when it comes to this veering plant based? Because of course, Mayor Eric Adams is plant based, really addressed some major health concerns, and is a great example in that respect. There's been some stuff in the news
Mm.
regarding his administration. I
Yeah.
haven't followed that super closely,
Yeah.
but what have you seen just from your, unique window into all of this in New York City?
I have a unique window because the other thing that I really watch is cities and the power of city shift. And so
Mm.
knowing, people on the inside of the administration of Mayor Adams' administration in New York City who work on food has been really amazing because they have shifted hospital food in a plant-based direction. They, I believe, are looking at prisons or working on prisons. They've done a major thing to shift school food, right? So they are actually the model that I am just going to keep, whatever happens with Mayor Adams, however this goes, what they've been doing for the last couple of years is unbelievable. And it is a model for any city. And I will say my work tends to be really focused on the United States because we are so flipping far behind on everything. And New
Mm.
York City's been able to put these things into place and do these things. And so we literally have like models and examples, and it should just be a book of case studies that we share with every city. And there are
Mm.
organizations called climate mayors and cities for climate and all of these things. Every single one of those cities should be doing the exact same thing that New York City's been doing with these food policy shifts, because that is climate action. And so I think what New York City's been doing is amazing, and there's a huge opportunity to make that like the model.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fascinating to me. I mean, I used to live in New York City. I moved to Nashville in 2017, but lived in New York City, born and raised in New York State and Connecticut. So that's kind of my world. And so yeah, it's been really cool to see these changes happening again on a bigger level. Um so I'm curious for you, how would you say that you've evolved as a vegan?
Mm. I think the main thing is evolving how to communicate it and how to represent it so that I inspire other people. I think I've also been evolving so that I am connecting more with other vegans. I've been kind of out in my world in climate, and I don't really know any vegans kind of, I don't know, for whatever reason, right? Other than John and a couple people. I've been trying to figure out ways to meet more vegans and to,
Mm.
figure out also how we all can be spreading the word and doing our influence in our little neighborhoods and stuff together. I think, um, how else? Yeah, I think it's just more, I'm just studying more and learning more and being, talking to people like you, and there's so much to learn and there's so much to understand that it's been wonderful. Oh, the other thing that I mean, this is the thing. It always goes back to my work, like what I'm doing. I'm learning more as I force the issue with the things that I do in work, which is I was also just at an event that was an incredible kind of sort of businessy summit kind of conference thing. And they very specifically said, "Are you vegan?" And I said, "Yes." Right. And so then you look at the food that's there, and it still, even though I had like said, "Yes, I'm a vegan," and I'm sure that 30% of the people there probably were, it was still really hard. And what happened was the food systems people, I kept saying, "What? Is there something vegan that we can have here?" And whatever. And they would run back and they would quick make me some sort of a burrito and bring it out to me. And I was like, "No, like you need to put a tray of that out. Like, you don't serve me alone as a vegan, but realize that this is a thing. And it isn't, we can't just eat avocado toast for breakfast, So I think that I'm evolving and getting louder when I'm in the moment of those things.
Mhm.
And I'm
Mhm.
finding that the food service people immediately get it and they can run around and scrappily create something. So that transition that we talked about, that what Greener by
Mhm.
Default is doing and shifting institutional food, the chefs welcome it, right? Because
Right.
this really needs to happen. And I'm getting louder about, like, it's not that hard and you're going to make a lot more people happier. And by the way, a lot of people who aren't vegan are going to pick the vegan option. And I think that's something that people don't really think about.
People don't really think about it, and sometimes it's not the case. Like, again, from a marketing perspective, it's oftentimes a little confusing about how best to represent these vegan dishes. On the one hand, we just want people eating delicious vegan food and enjoying it. When do we let them know that it's vegan? If we have the vegan cake specially labeled, sometimes they'll go for the non-vegan cake. Like, it's so messy and it's so confusing.
Well, and I agree. And I feel like there are all these little, like, there's gluten free, there are all these little things. I
Right,
think the
yeah.
point is like, does that chocolate cake look really good? Yes, it does. Right. Like, really, I think just putting the little V and the gluten free and the whatever for the people that are vegan to, like, know, but
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just make an amazing looking burrito or an amazing looking casserole. People are going to
right.
dig in. They don't, no one's going to go, I have to, is there any meat in it? I won't eat it. No, it just is like, look at it. So I think you're right. The labeling
Right.
is this thing, but I think subtle, 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 and always surprising people at the back end. And I think no one is going to die if they accidentally eat a vegan meal. No one. So
Well, I mean, maybe if they have a nut allergy or
maybe,
something.
I
I
mean,
mean,
maybe,
that's
yeah. Yeah.
but yeah.
But I mean, yeah.
Very
I mean,
yeah.
people that make vegan meals are going to know about nut allergy. I don't think nuts go into a lot of
Yes,
things now
yes.
because
No,
of that.
agreed, agreed.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, Andrea, it sounds like you're very comfortable being, the vegan in the room, being the person that's kind of pushing these limits and, like, saying the word. Is that true? Do you ever feel just kind of the burden of that, or is it just more your innate enthusiasm trumps everything else?
No, I definitely feel the burden of that. And in fact, it's come up in our conversation, which is, I know that the community that I'm in can handle the word plant-based better. And so I
Mm,
use the word
mm,
plant-based. Then if I get into a
mhm,
personal
mhm,
conversation with somebody about it, I talk about vegan, being vegan. I'm
mhm,
vegan, right? And the animals and all that. So it's more of a communications thing. And that's just the
mhm,
way that I've found to do that. So yeah, it still
mhm.
is challenging. But I have made a visible part of my brand to be talking about plant-based for climate. So they know what they're getting in a way when I'm in the room.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I feel like that's the other part of the thing that I've mentioned of, like, everyone should talk about it a little bit more, or say, I just ate at the greatest vegan restaurant, or I just, like, subtle cues, because then you've
Right.
laid the groundwork. People aren't going to be shocked out of their gourd if you say something, which then can lead to a deeper conversation about the animals and veganism, really kind of dialed in.
Right, right. Well, I just have to say it kind of cracks me up, your mention of the term subtle, because sometimes I think I'm being so subtle and I'm not really being that subtle in
Oh,
other
okay.
people's eyes. But
Oh, okay.
but yeah, I mean, obviously I share that burden, that sense of responsibility, and speaking these terms, and phrasing it in the way that's gonna cause
Mhm.
it to land. But and I do my best to look at it as that's part of the both the honor and the privilege and the responsibility of being at the forefront of something, of a noble,
Mhm.
just cause. I mean,
Mhm.
everybody throughout history who has been on the right side of some important issue has had to bear this burden, and so this is ours as vegans.
I think that's a
So
great
thank you. Yeah.
that's a wonderful way to look at it. And I actually like that's a wonderful reminder at this point. And I will say that given it's election day, we all have our hope. And when I look at the hope that I have, it's for climate, more climate related whatever kind of policies coming into place, and the continuing work of a senator like Cory Booker on industrialized agriculture, the way that we can change farming, the way that we are more set up now for a just transition in farming and helping farmers transition, all of that, I think we're really set up for that. And if you look at the campaign of the side that we hope wins the election, there's more joy and kind of love and more collaboration. And it just seems like moving forward, we are set up to be in a good place in kind of spreading this word a little faster.
Yeah. Fingers crossed for spreading the word in a way that works.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your stories and just, again, this unique insight that you have into this world and the bigger picture workings of vegan activism, plant-based activism, environmental activism. I've got just a couple more questions for you. One, I'm just curious on a personal level, there are all these so-called environmental movements that focus more on things like homesteading and grass-fed, I love how they call it grass-fed beef, just like grass-fed hamburgers or something, like grass-fed animals that are, turned into beef. But, and then organizations like Heifer International, like just, does that drive you bonkers? Just these sectors of the environmental movement that are heavily animal focused?
Yes. It does drive me bonkers. The other thing that is really challenging is climate tech in general. And then there's the whole thing, and there are, regenerative ag as a term that a lot of things can be put into that really are supporting and helping us continue with animal ag. That's really frustrating to me. And so it's one of the reasons that I'm really interested in finding more even climate tech leaders who are vegan, so that they talk about how ridiculous it is for us to keep, figuring out ways that are more sustainable to keep feeding, using animals as food, when there's this obvious solution, which is stop with the animals. And so it is really irritating and frustrating. And I will say that in my storytelling and in podcasting, like if I could find, somebody who was in that space who was like, whoa, wait a second, went vegan. Again, people say I look for unicorns. I have hope to find a unicorn like that, because telling the story of like, I was in climate tech and I was doing this, methane reducing seaweed thing. And then I realized that would be an incredible story.
Well, I love that you're looking for the unicorn, because, we've got to have the people at least looking, because once one arises, I'm confident that you will be on it.
I will be on it for sure.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Andrea. Really been an interesting conversation. And the final question, which I pose to all my guests, is there a particular word that for you sums up what being vegan is all about?
I'm going to say the word joy. It's people who are familiar with me know that that's a word that I use a lot. I'm getting a tattoo that says joy is an act of resistance. There's a lot of climate implications too, but I had no idea how much shifting kind of my perspective on food and becoming vegan would up my capacity for joy. And it's almost like kind of the health, opening up your body and getting lighter in that way, kind of from a health perspective, also just really shifts your mind and your emotional state. And it also helps you just in your relationship with the animals in your life. Joy. I think joy is the word for me.
That's beautiful. I love it. And I relate tremendously. And there's that saying that living well is the best revenge. And, arguably living well and in joy is the best form of activism. Because like you said, if people see that joy, who doesn't want some more joy?
Yep, that's it.
So yeah, beautifully stated. So thank
oh,
you for that.
thank you. This has been really fun. I really appreciate the opportunity to get into a little bit more of the personal end of what I'm up to, because I talk a lot about the climate thing. So thank you.
Yeah, we're a person-centered podcast, or I need to stop calling it a podcast because we're in video, or person-centered.
Whatever this is.
Whatever this is. Yes,
Show.
Whatever it is. Yeah. So, all right. Well, again, thank you. And we close every segment of the Vegan Posse by taking 30 seconds of silence for all of the suffering animals, human and non-human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Andrea, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.